Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
In this thread, ghosts and haunted house stories from your local area. Here are the ones I know of around where I live. Running Man. Along a certain stretch of a nearby highway, M52, there's a ghost of a man dressed in 70s jogging attire, short shorts, tank top, sweatband, etc. He suffers the fate of running up and down the road for eternity. He's the ghost of a man who was hit by a semi in the 70s. My friend's dad said he saw him once and pulled over to ask if he needed a ride. It was snowing pretty heavily. When he looked behind him to see where the guy was, he'd disappeared. My friend's dad hauled ass out of there. The Watcher. If you go along certain back roads around here, and there are plenty of them, you might occasionally see some taillights that seem to swerve around the road a little bit. If you follow long enough, they'll disappear over one of the blind hills. When you come over the hill, you'll see a woman dressed in white standing on the side of the road. She'll just watch you drive by. Picking her up is not suggested. The old cement factory. Maybe a 5-minute hike from my house. There are the remains of some kind of factory in the middle of the woods. There are no paths or roads that go there. As far as I know, no one knows the history of the place. All that's really left is the foundation and a few walls. I've never had the balls to go there at night, but even during the day you get a weird vibe from the place and the occasional cold spot. I'd love to figure out what happened there. The Pink Palace. Probably the most popular place in the area as far as the supernatural is concerned. It just got torn down maybe a year ago, but it was a huge old Victorian-style house. There were rumors that there were some sort of rituals performed there. When the place was still standing, there was random Latin spray-painted in the walls, a bathtub stained with blood, and dead animals in strange places. The barn and slave houses are still up, from what I've heard. I haven't been there in a few years. Some people say they've heard voices there, but I only get a feeling of being unwelcome there.
Many ghost hunters will often speak bravely of confronting a ghost, but often find excuses as to why they cannot. But perhaps one of the bravest ghost hunters that I have ever come across was a man named Richard Gill, who attempted to track down the phantom motorcyclist of Elmore, Ohio in 1968. This motorcyclist is linked to a ghost light that has been said to appear on March 21st every year in a small town called Elmore, Ohio. The story claims that this rider met an untimely death shortly after World War I. He had been mustered out of the army and with his pay, bought a brand new motorcycle. He came home to Elmore in hopes of seeing his best girl, whom he had not seen in some time. When he arrived at her family's farm, he learned that she had become engaged to another man. Angry and hurt, he roared off on the motorcycle. A few yards from the girl's driveway, the road curved and crossed a bridge. Somehow, the young soldier lost control of the bike and crashed into a ravine. His body and motorcycle were later found in pieces. The bike had been torn apart, and the young man had been decapitated. Every year after, on the anniversary of the young man's death, visitors who stood on the bridge reported seeing the light of the motorcycle as it left the farm, rounded the curve, and then vanished halfway across the bridge. Richard Gill was a student at nearby Bowling Green University and had an avid interest in the paranormal. As March 21st neared, he and a friend decided to stake out the haunted bridge. They brought along a movie camera, a still camera, and a tape recorder. They parked their car on the far side of the bridge and then followed the procedure that, legend had it, caused the ghost light to appear. He blinked his car lights 3 times and then honked his horn 3 times. Suddenly, the light appeared near the farmhouse and flew toward the bridge, where it vanished. Excited now, they repeated the experiment, this time crossing the bridge with a string. This way, they would learn if it was a physical object that crossed the bridge rather than a supernatural one. They repeated the summoning procedure, and the light appeared again, following the same course. The string remained where they had left it. Now it was time for the next step. One of them would stand in the middle of the bridge as the light approached. The light appeared again, and Gill was puzzled when his friend did not return to the car. He went to check on him and found him in a ditch by the side of the road, badly beaten. He had no idea what had hit him and recalled nothing other than watching the light approach. Somehow, Gil convinced his friend to try one last experiment. They parked on the same side of the bridge from the direction the light came from and pointed their car in the opposite direction. This time, after summoning the light, they started moving away from it. The light overtook them, passed through the car, and vanished. And Gil and his friend kept right on driving. What did the cameras and recorder pick up? The movie film was totally blank. The still camera picked up only a light source, and the recorder picked up some sort of high-pitched noise. Was it the ghost light? There was no way to tell. In the years that have followed, the ghost light continues to return to the bridge. Is the phenomena really caused by the ghost of a dead motorcyclist? Or is he a convenient legend, like the decapitated railroad men who haunt crossings where ghost lights are seen? No one really knows for sure, but on March 21st, you can bet that there will be people on the Elmore Bridge who hope to find out.
Brit here. There was a big house near where I lived, where these two old hermits apparently used to live. The house was in a row of houses, and it stood out like a big festering wound. The plants were wild, the trees overshadowing everything. Every window was grated over and boarded up, and there was no visible light on in the home at any time. However, it used to be said that the hermits still lived there, and only on the blackest nights, mind you, they came out of their home. One night in November, or December, not sure which, I was riding past the place on my bike when I just so happened to glance over at the place. Standing right there in the garden was a man dressed in all black ragged clothes, with hair growing long and untamed all over him and huge uncut, unclean nails. But the one thing I could see most clearly were his eyes. I almost shit myself at the sight of him. I rode off as fast as I could, and even now I don't go past it during winter.
I was on a holiday in Spain a while back, had a bout of insomnia, and so decided to walk it off. So after walking for a while, I came to a pier. I had my camera on me at the time and thought I could get some pictures, and I just wanted somewhere to walk, seeing as it was like 2 a.m. and I was still wide awake. So I'm close to 20 to 30 yards away from the end, and I see this woman. She's just standing there on the end looking out to sea. I decided to keep walking anyway, but when I was close, things started to feel wrong. I suddenly noticed that her hair wouldn't stop flowing, like there was a heavy wind, but I felt nothing, not warm, not cold, just nothing. She didn't notice me when I was close. I didn't actually sound quiet. I was wearing boots at the time and just walked normally, but she didn't turn, move, she just stood there. When I came up next to her, I heard her laugh gently. Her hair covered her face. It was long, black.
I knew you would come back. We can be together now.
I stood there. I couldn't talk or move. She turned, but I still didn't see her face, not until she looked right at me. The wind caught her hair, blew it back. She had white skin, no pigment whatsoever. She was smiling at first, but the moment her eyes looked at me, everything went black, cold. I woke up a few minutes later in the same spot. No one was there. The wind was blowing strongly, and I suddenly noticed the waves. I could hear them again. I got home a while later and decided to plug my camera in to check my pictures on the off chance I caught one of her, only to find the entire thing white.
My dad tells me that used to live in a haunted house when he was a young boy. Normally I'm skeptical, but since he's a very down-to-earth guy who has never displayed any interest in the supernatural, I believe him. That, and both of his brothers and my grandmother back up the story. The most common story I hear from them is hearing footsteps on the stair. My grandfather worked late, so it was just my grandmother and the 3 kids home at night. And every night when they gathered around the piano, my grandmother was a bit of a musician. They'd hear footsteps coming down the stairs, yet they'd never reach the bottom. My dad says they never talked about it, but every night my grandmother would place a chair against the door leading up the stairs so that it couldn't be opened. And a friend of mine in high school also claimed to live in a haunted house. Oddly enough, his experience also consisted of mysterious sounds on the stairs. Except for him, instead of footsteps, it was the sound of a rubber ball bouncing down the stairs. He says they also used to find an unusual amount of animals in the house: snakes, squirrels, birds, all kinds of stuff would find its way inside. And eventually, he said that his neighbor finally let slip that the previous owner of the house had hung himself inside. Another friend of mine claims that when he was 6 years old, he was sitting on his bed, a day or so after his mother had died of a heart attack. Says he suddenly heard movement behind him, and when he turned, there was the ghost of his mother sitting there. Those are my only 3 stories. They're pretty cliche, but they're supposedly the real thing. And they are all second-hand stories. I've never experienced anything myself, and frankly I'm not sure if I would ever want to experience anything. I am personally very intrigued by the supernatural. But if I actually ever encountered something, I'd probably slip into a catatonic state or something.
In the subdivision where I grew up, there was this weird abandoned house right by the bus stop. It was older than any of the houses around it. There was an immaculate old sedan from the 30s or 40s in the locked garage, and there was a huge pile of dead bees in front of the door. Sometimes at night there'd be lights on inside. Even thought the house had one of those padlocks on the front door. Then, one day in middle school, the house disappeared. Literally, one day it was there, and the next morning, it was gone. The only way we knew we weren't all crazy was that the mailbox was still there, sitting on the edge of what was now an empty lot. Somehow this house was demolished. The basement was filled in, all the debris was taken away, and the plot was covered in fresh sod well enough that you couldn't tell where the old grass ended and the new grass began, all over the course of a single night. That, or it vanished.
My town is Flushing, Queens, and this truly happened to me. In the spring of 1983, in Flushing, New York, Queens, a small park called Leonard's Triangle had a massive shootout. It started over a simple ball game and a foul about walking. 5 kids were killed, and 1 committed self-terminated out of Luna City soon after. My friend Jason and I were playing basketball until 3 in the morning, drinking some beers and hanging out with the other kids. Soon, everyone left and we decided to spend the night at the basketball court of the Triangle, seeing as how our asses would be beat if we came home drunk. We were sleeping for about an hour when we heard the dribbling of basketballs on the ground. Still groggy, I looked at my friend's wristwatch. It read 3:58. We thought these guys were early hardcore b-ballers, so we stood up and asked if we could join in. The 5 playing merely grunted, and they threw us the ball. 1 kid was sitting with his head in his hands, watching us from the seats across the field. We soon started playing, and after about 6 points, we realized the chain link fences that lead to the sidewalk seemed to get farther away. By point 30, the fences seemed miles away. The guys sitting on the bench started coming toward us, and with fright we realized we never managed to see their faces. The spotlights fell on such a way that the shadows hid their faces. We booked it, and 3 years later, I recently Googled this. My doctor, parents, and everyone else told me I was just drunk. I think it was the Leonard Triangle victims.
There's this guy who lives down my street, Mr. Draper. You know those really cranky old men you see in TV shows ... like. They pop your football before they give it back to you, or smash your frisbee and give you the remains. He's that kind of guy. He's lived there since my grandparents were my age. They tell me there used to be a Mrs. Draper, but she contracted some illness and died. When me and my friends were younger, we'd tell one another ghost stories about how he killed her and kept her in his house somewhere. You know, dumb kid stuff that everyone does when they're younger. A couple of nights back there was this scream that came out from his house. Someone called the police to report it, and soon after that an ambulance turned up. The cops probably called for it. They took a body out of the house, loaded it into the ambulance, and headed out. It was all bagged up, but everyone assumed it was him, because nobody else lives there. Of course, all kinds of rumors start flying around. Oh, it was the ghost of Mrs. Draper exacting her revenge on her murderous husband. Oh, he had a heart attack and died. Oh, it was his time and he saw death himself. Whatever. In all honesty, I don't know what happened. Nobody does, really, except the police, and they can't tell us, because it's confidential. But I saw him. I walked past his house today, and I swear to God he was standing on his porch, watching me. Not just glancing at me, he was staring right at me.
According to students and some staff members of the Urbana High School in Urbana, Illinois, something walks the hallways of the school that comes from another world. In fact, in a certain location in the building is a doorway that leads to the most haunted location in the building. Few supposedly know where to find this doorway, but nearly any student can tell you at least one ghost story about the tower. This tower is an upper part of the building that has been closed off for some time. It once contained classrooms, but now is empty, save for the ghosts. One legend about the ghost in the tower involves a teacher who fell in love with a student and then hanged herself. Another story involves a girl who was mixed up in a love triangle with a married teacher, and still another tells of a boy who committed self-termination there. No one really seems to be sure just how the stories got started, but whether or not the place is haunted seems to be no mystery. Staff members recall incidents in the past that have been linked to ghosts and the tower. On one occasion, staff members found the door to the tower unlocked and no one knew how it had gotten that way. The police were called, and when officers got there, a loud tapping sound was heard from the tower. The police were so frightened that they made the principal go up the stairs first. Other claims that strange lights have been seen in the tower at night, and the fourth-floor walls were plagued with a mysteriously peeling paint. The walls would be freshly painted, and within months, all of the paint would have peeled off. There remains no explanation for this.
I used to see this ghost when I was a kid. My family would move all over the US like once or twice a year, every house or apartment. One time each he was there. From age 3 to maybe 13, he was a kid that reminded me a lot of the Oliver Twist movie. I never knew why, but he would randomly sneak up behind me when I was washing my hands after I took a piss. He'd scare the crap out of me, and I'd run out of there. But when I was about 15, he appeared outside the bathroom in my sister's doorway, but in a different form. This time, and only this time, the tall figure was definitely my grandfather, whom I never met. I was calmer, but still freaked out. As always, I ran. That was the last time I saw him. Last year, I had a full-out telepathic convo with the dude. He was like probing my mind. I was so embarrassed about things like puberty. It was some crazy-ass being me. So that last encounter went similar to this. I was sitting in the small living room of my mom's rundown apartment playing Deus Ex Invisible War for the Xbox. Just playing with tons of dead bodies. 1 dead body on fire equals Lames blowout. 10 to 20 burning dead bodies equals continual bonfire. So I was working away at my masterpiece of Human in Flame when the phone in the kitchen starts dialing a number randomly out of effing nowhere. I freak out, of course, because no one else is anywhere around. I go check it out. It's dialing set to the speaker. I pick up the receiver and it goes dead like nothing happened. Freaked out. I go to turn back to the game and the light above me turns off, then flickers back on. So I walk towards the sink to try to get a grip. I suddenly become overly conscious of my acne and my face starts to hurt. Guess where the face wash I just bought was? That's right, in the bathroom. I just stare at the kitchen sink for a long time, trying to get the courage to go wash my face. I finally attempt to go wash my face. I decided to run in, grab it, run out, and wash in the kitchen. Smart, right? I wash my face, getting progressively more freaked out as I go. I start thinking, go away, go away, go away, go away. Then I yell, why are you doing this? And please stop, you're scaring me, I'm so freaked out. As I open my eyes, they focus on the refrigerator in front of me, with my back to the sink now. There are 2 pictures propped up on top of the fridge. They're of him, my mom's dad, who I never knew. I was more happy than freaked at that point because things were finally coming together. I said, it's you, why were you messing with me? And suddenly I understood the answer. It wasn't spoken to me through speech or thought. I just knew. There was no other way to get one's attention from this world other than fear, and to use the curiosity of the being to further lure it. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew it wasn't normal. I just started thinking about stuff, more in the form of sentences explaining certain events in my memories, and he and I would share with one another. It was seriously the most peaceful I ever felt. I really felt connected to this man I never knew, only connected by our bloodline. I told him about Deus Ex and other video games and my girlfriend at the time. He made me feel better about myself. Now I'm not so hard on myself like I used to be. I just go with the flow, create my art, play video games, and have fun. This is turning kind of lame, so I'll say that it was an experience to remember and gives me hope for a life beyond the flesh.
There's a haunted room at a retirement home in the town where I live. I learned about it when we visited my great-grandmother, who was 98. The staff told me about it, and they kept it locked at all times, though they weren't very secretive about it. I asked them if I could go in, and the nurse just shrugged and unlocked it for me. Before that time, I was pretty skeptical about paranormal stuff, but of course I was a little nervous. The room was furnished like the other rooms, filled with little trinkets a lot of old people tend to have. At first sight it seemed normal, but everything was covered with a layer of dust. I'd love to tell you I saw something terrifying in there, but I only noticed how quiet it was in that room. I didn't even hear any traffic. I bumped my foot on a chair leg when I decided to get out of there fast. The nurse just smiled at me and said told you so when she locked the door.
A good friend of mine, while growing up, lived in a house that was supposedly haunted by the ghost of a woman who had self-terminated herself in one of the bedrooms. Weird things happened all the time, like salt shakers falling and breaking all over the floor without being touched, areas of furious energy that made people freak out when they went near them, and soft crying heard at night. I stayed over one time with my friend and we were just going to bed. Her door was open, and as I was laying there trying to go to sleep, I saw a middle-aged woman in a white dress walk past, glancing at me with this haughty, irritated look on her face. I told my friend, and she said she'd seen her before. I think it was those episodes that got me interested in the paranormal.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.